Hi everyone, thank you for coming. We're going to start tonight with a short reading by Gary, and then we'll go into conversation. So maybe we could just go right into it, Gary.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks, Adele. Thanks for being here. Wonderful to be back at the 92nd Street Y and speaking to you. Yeah, I know, right? We're here live.
I believe it.
We're real people. Yeah, this is the last of my in-person readings for my Our Country Friends tour. Nice to be back in New York. It's a lovely country outside of it. I ate pizza with mashed potatoes on it in a city, Boston, I think it was called. Lovely place, but so nice to be home. So yeah, I'll read a little bit. I haven't actually read from the book before ever, so this will be the first time.
Thank you for doing it under duress.
Under duress, yeah.
I've been requested by.
I've been duressed,
yes.
Yeah. So I guess I'll just read from the very beginning of this book, which has a beautiful cover for those of you who got a wine glass, very nice. The house on the hill was in a tizzy. Oh my God, this is like a complete ripoff of Anna Karenina, isn't it? Right? Sorry, I'm just realizing, I'm like, all right.
Wow, that's...
Yeah, no imagination whatsoever. Okay. I'll start again.
Is it striking you for the first time?
Yeah.
It didn't strike me, honestly.
It didn't?
I've now read... This is probably my third time here in the beginning, and now that you point it out, I'm like, Gary, it's...
It's very Karenina-ish, right? Okay, all right, great. I'll start again with this complete ripoff of a book. Anna Shteyngart by Gary Shteyngart. The house on the hill was in a tizzy. Workmen's trucks streamed up the long gravel driveway. Two sets of plumbers from both sides of the river had been summoned to de-winterize the 5 bungalows behind the main house, and they did not care for one another. A broken set of windows in one bungalow had to be replaced post-haste, and a family of field mice had chewed through the electrical cable powering another. The handyman, who did not live on the property, was so overwhelmed by the state of affairs, he retreated to the extensive covered porch to eat a cheese sandwich in long, deliberative bites. The mistress of the house, Masha, had lowered the shades in her first-floor office to escape the cacophony of modern tools and loud country cursing. At times, she would peek out to note the surfaces that would have to be wiped down after the workmen left. Natasha, who liked to go by Nat, her 8-year-old daughter, was upstairs, illuminated by a screen in the darkness of her room in a lonely public world of her own. The only happy member of the household was Alexander Borisovich Senderovsky, known as Sasha to his friends. Happy, we should say, with an asterisk. He was agitated as well as excited. A windstorm had brought down the heavy branches of 2 dead trees flanking the driveway, scattering the vast front lawn with their dead white rot. Senderovsky liked to expound at length upon the entropic nature of his estate, the way all manners of growth was allowed to go its own way, sumacs elbowing out more well-heeled plants, ivy poisoning the perimeter, groundhogs bringing destruction upon the gardens. But the scattering of dead tree limbs made the house on the hill look apocalyptic. The one thing Senderovsky's guests were coming up to escape. The handyman claimed a bad back and was not handy enough to remove all the tree limbs on his own, and the so-called tree guy had gone missing. Senderovsky, in his athletic pants and wildly colored dressing gown, had tried to move one of those prehistoric-looking branches himself, but the very first heave made him fear a hernia. "Oh, the hell with it," he said, and got into his car. A word about the car. Well, not so much about the car as the way in which it was driven. Senderovsky had only learned to drive 3 years ago at the milestone age of 45, and only within the limits of a country setting. The highway on the other side of the river unsettled him. He was a fiercely awful driver. The half-empty local roads inspired him to gun the engine of his sturdy but inflexible Swedish automobile, and he saw the yellow stripes bisecting the roads as suggestions, meant for less experienced drivers, whoever those might be. Because he did not believe in road marks or certain aspects of relativity, the concept of a blind curve continued to elude him. His wife no longer allowed him to drive with their child on board. What was worse, he had somewhere picked up the phrase, tooling around. And now Senderovsky raced to his errands, mindful only of the speed traps set with boring predictability on the frayed edges of towns or the school zones where the fines could be doubled. First, he visited his butchers, two former catalog models from the city, now a husband and wife, who plied their trade out of a barn so red it verged on the patriotic. The two magnificent 25-year-olds, all teeth and coveralls, presented him with a wrapped parcel of sweet and Italian sausages, glistening hamburger patties, and his secret weapon, lamb steaks that clung to the bone, so fresh they could only have been rivaled by a restaurant Senderovsky admired in Rome's abattoir district. The very sight of meat for tomorrow's cookout inspired in him a joy that in a younger man could have been called love. Not because of the meat itself, but because of the conversations that would flow around it as it was marinated, grilled, and served, despite the growing restrictions on such closeness. By noon tomorrow, his best friends, the ones who had been so hard to bring together during previous summers, would finally unite, brought together by the kernels of a growing tragedy, to be sure, but brought together nonetheless in his favorite place on earth, the house on the hill. Of course, someone else was coming too, someone who was not a friend, someone who made Senderovsky, already a drinker, drink more.
It gets better every time.
Oh, that's sweet. I hope.
So one thing I feel like noticed about you, Gary, you published your first book in 2002, The Russian Debutante's Handbook. Every 4 years since then, like clockwork, you've published a book. 2006, 2010, 14, 18. And then this, it's not time.
It's not time, I know. Everyone's frightened, like, what's happening? What's happening? Well, this book took it was composed in record time, 6 months, because of the pandemic. There was nothing to do. Everyone around me baked bread, but...
Are you trying to make other writers feel bad about themselves? 6 months?
But
wow.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but you know, the editing took some time too. But it was the breadless part of it. You know, every writer I know made beautiful bread. My friend Paul shared his loaves with me. Oh my God, semolina like you wouldn't believe. But I don't know how to do basic things. So for me, like Senderovsky too, I didn't know how to drive until 7 years ago. But now that I live half the year upstate, I have to learn to pilot that inflexible Swedish automobile I talked about. And also because you don't go to parties. There are parties upstate, but they always end at 8 p.m. You know, it was like, oh my God. I mean, you live in Rhinebeck, right? So
totally.
Yeah,
He's right. He's absolutely right.
Everyone's like 8 p.m. They're like, oh my God. I mean, because when my chickens start crowing, I have to, you know. But but you know, in the city, everyone you go to these parties and you don't really miss them when you're upstate, but there's always, writers these days, it's not like Norman Mailer's gonna come up and stab you anymore, right? It's more like, there'll be a bunch of adjuncts standing around with bad white wine and everyone's complaining about health insurance and, you know, but you get really drunk because you have to drink to get through those things. So I remember coming home after so much horrible Beaujolais that I would just not be functional the next day. But during the pandemic, this didn't happen. I was upstate, I was constantly sober, and I would write very quickly. I was very happy with that.
How do you think that influenced the book itself? Do you think the circumstances in which you wrote it had an effect on its tone?
Very much so. I think when I'm in the country, and I'm only in the country and I have no other stimuli from the city or from travel to interesting places, I enter this Chekhovian zone, which is the other ripoff of this book after Anna Karenina, very much. Because I was surrounded by Chekhov. I reread all of him in Russian, and I decided to try the new translation, which is pretty good, the Volkonsky's. But I fell into this hugely Chekhovian mode, and Chekhov is really about people hit their middle age, they're deeply dissatisfied, they're in the country, there's nothing to do for them to stew in their dissatisfaction, right? And I decided to try that too, you know. I don't have a banya, but I have a hot tub. And it became the hot tub of doom. And I just kind of sat there stewing. And also because there was nothing else to do, as I said, I began to take these long 6-mile walks through the country lanes surrounding my house, and I began to have these imaginary friends. When I came to this country, I didn't have no friends because I didn't speak no English. So I began to imagine these friends who became these characters. And as you do when you create characters, you take a little from this person, a little from that person, and then you kind of merge them you make a hamburger patty out of them, and then voila,
Right.
Right, she says.
Well, I'm curious. How would you characterize this book compared to your previous books? In that, I would say there's a few things for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of reading it yet. It's wonderful. It's different. It's not that it's less comic, but the comedy's more mellow, and I feel like it's your only book that doesn't travel. All of your books go places.
Yeah.
And so much of the comedy is the descriptions of the places. And
That's right. You're absolutely right. The lack of travel, and even even New York is a form of travel because from one block to another you're in a whole different planet, right? But upstate is singularly upstate. There are people with black pickup trucks. There's a groundhog that terrorizes our trees. It's very stable from day to day. The only thing you notice is the change in nature as, so I was like, oh my God, it's daffodil season, things I'd never noticed before. All of us upstaters got these apps, so we were like, oh, that's a bird, according to this, and tree, ground, I don't know. We were really excited about those. So we began to commune with nature, and I think that softened the rhythm of it, and the plot everything began to move a little bit more slowly, as I think we all did become a little slower during the pandemic. And again, the idea of writing a country novel began to appeal to me. As soon as the pandemic was starting to happen, I realized I'd be up there, and I abandoned this whole other novel that I was writing because it wasn't dystopian enough. It was kind of a funny novel about set in a future where NYU had taken over most of Manhattan and had built its own walls around it and its own police force, the violet helmets, And I guess that was funny, but I was thinking this is way worse.
Right.
Maybe, NYU taking over. I teach at Columbia, but, it'd be all right. Maybe they'd give me asylum or something. I don't know. But it all started to seem like silly academic satire compared to, remember, it wasn't just a pandemic. There was a certain president in office, and everything was just a complete disaster. So I decided to focus on the present day and on my present location, which was invariably the country.
Right. And there's also a group protagonist, and you're no stranger to writing about protagonists that you might personally have something in common with, but also you've done an amazing job with female protagonists in Super Set Tree Love Story. So it's not that you haven't written in the past from the perspective of people other than yourself, but this is different. There's 6 friends, and the book shifts pretty liberally between them. How did that come about? When did that?
I decided to try a truly omniscient narrator as opposed to one that's always wedded to one person. So the previous book before this, Lake Success, there were narrators, but they're closely hewed to each of the 2 characters. Right. It wasn't first person, but here I decided, and again, sorry to keep bringing up Chekhov, but he really is able to just hop and skip from one person's interiority to another. And I decided to put together this group. And a lot of them, and I also wanted, because this is the first book I've ever written about friendship. Friendship is really, I've had friends in other books, but it's in the title, right? Friends. And I really needed the friendship to play first fiddle here, because the other books I've written, all of my earlier books, when you're writing immigrant stuff, and you had a wonderful immigrant character in Nathaniel P. You're writing a lot about their relationship to their parents, as you did, because it's such an intergenerational horror show when you're trying to adapt and your parents have different ideas from a different century, etc. And but in this book, all of the 4 of the characters, or 3 of the characters, are best friends who are immigrants from Korea, India, and Russia. And their parents are sometimes mentioned, but their parents are really off stage or in the greater Florida area. And, or dead, And so they've already internalized their parents. So at this stage in my game, because I'm about to be 50 next year, Jesus. For Russian men, that's quite an age to reach. It's pretty much unheard of. Shocking. But, I find that all of the immigrant friends that I grew up with, and I grew up with many people who would fit easily into the shoes of these characters, we have reached a détente with what our parents have given us and the Americanness that we have made out of ourselves.
Right. Were your parents relieved to not figure in this one?
I was fortunate that the one book that hasn't been translated into Russian was Little Failure, my memoir. Phew.
I thought that was so tender toward your parents, but I
they heard a Terry Gross interview and they went nuts.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
I guess it reads differently when you are the parents in the book.
Yeah.
Even though I think as a reader, I thought it was very loving and respectful.
Well, thank you. I agree. I mean, I thought I was quite loving to them too. But it's interesting what you bring up, because in the room we were talking about being parents, which we both are, and we were talking about the difference in this book. I think being a parent has changed my levels of empathy. Hopefully, it's given me a little more than just living in my own, interior horror. But now I'm able to hop more, because I spend so much time thinking of what my kid is thinking and how he's reacting to the world around him. It really kind of broadens your mind, and you're able then to extend that same thing to other people. I was on a plane on my tour, and there was a screaming baby, and usually I would just be so angry, and I was like, "Oh, what's he fussy about?" Poor kid. I know how that goes.
Wow. Are you sure that's not just because you hadn't been on a plane for 2 years with COVID?
Maybe. Yeah.
Something. I mean, you've mentioned writing this book during the pandemic. You also wrote recently in the New Yorker about what else was going on in your life while you were writing the book.
Anyone know about that? Yeah. Woo! Yeah! Botched circumcision. Only at the 92nd Street Y can you get applause for a botched circumcision. Thank you. Yeah.
So,
Jesus.
I think that's a pretty remarkable piece to read in conjunction with the book, to read the work that you were doing and then the circumstances in which you were doing it.
Yeah.
How do you think those two interacted?
I mean, you can't make it up. So for the first 4 months or so of writing, or even a little bit longer, things were okay. This is before for those who haven't read the article, I was circumcised at age 7. Things did not go well, but the pain subsided, and then the pain returned based on some little accident. And so for a while, I was in the deepest pain of the kind of pain you wouldn't wish on Ted Cruz, just horrific amounts of pain. And at one point, so without giving too much away, but a character does suffer in this book from a physical malady. And right as I already had planned out what was going to happen to him, and right before it was happening, this happened to me. And I was prescribed a whole bunch of drugs by about 12 different Upper East Side urologists, thanks. Some of these drugs had terrible reactions. I began to almost hallucinate or begin to be unable to figure out what was real and what was not. And that's exactly what's happening to my character. But every day, there was a kind of, you would take the drug and it would take effect, or you would take it at night and it would kind of take effect, and then it would plateau a little bit during the day. And those 3 hours when it plateaued, I would be writing about the hallucinations I was having earlier in the morning. So really great serendipity,
Yeah, that ring of truth,
Yeah, I mean, now anytime I have writer's block, I'm just going to stab myself in the groin and see what happens, Seems to work. Yeah.
Do you think the experience contributed to making the writing mellower or more empathetic, or is that too reductive or just not at all accurate?
I mean, now that I am, in this almost 50, and a lot of my friends are in the same age, many of us. I mean, this injury need not have happened. If I hadn't been circumcised as a 7-year-old, I'd be in really great physical shape. But a lot of my friends are we're encountering illnesses. Some are encountering very serious illnesses. Seeing people that I know as being so vital, and just memories of all the great so many of them are artists and writers who had very flamboyant young adulthoods, and I was a part of those adulthoods, and seeing us all brought low by various maladies, I think that has had a huge effect, and is because there's a tenderness at the center of all these friendships, right? And that's a tenderness that I feel to so many of my friends who are ill, and I think that was a tenderness that was returned to me when I was going through, Penisgate. Everyone chimed in, Rivka Galchen and Mary Carr gave me names of doctors that they should consult and just talked me through some of the quasi-suicidal feelings I was having. My friend Suketu Mehta, the writer, got me these. It was very hard for me to wear pants at that point because of all the pain, and he got me these dhotis, these sarong-type Indian garments from the south of India, and those were really helpful. I wore those garments a lot. Salman Rushdie, I talked to him about, because he had his own experience with religious fanatics, obviously. So we found common cause there. Just all those things. Because it was the Chabadniks who, had their fun, sharpened their knives, and went for the kill. So all of that was really kept me both grounded and being able to focus on the work, and at the same time reminded me what this book was about and why I was writing it.
Right. It's funny. I get what you're saying when you say the book is more about friendship than any of your previous books are, but I guess I've discussed this with Gary before when we were in the room. I in preparation for this, I've reread all of Gary's books in succession, and I highly recommend it. It feels like reading it.
You heard it here first. Got to buy the whole oeuvre.
They read differently when you read them all at once. I feel like it's eye-opening. I almost feel like it's like I got too intimate a look into Gary. Like I've done
too
something.
Intimate is right.
Like I've spied on him in some inappropriate way. But it's all in the public domain.
It's public domain.
But it strikes me that I think I didn't quite notice as much the first time when I was reading that the friendship has always played a role. I've most recently read Absurdistan, and when Misha, the main character, who I feel like I've heard described, I maybe even described him as an anti-hero at one point. This time, I felt much more tenderly toward him. But when his friend Alyosha leaves, the story of their friendship is quite moving. So I feel like there's, to me, I think that there are ways in which this book seems different from your previous books, but then there are ways in which they certainly seem to come from the same place, some of the same interests. And how would you characterize the?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I maybe have given short shrift to the friendships in the other books. I'll say this, that in the other books, the romances, the friendships stand as a counterpart to relationships with parents that aren't working. And I think in some ways, I recently wrote a piece about this for Esquire about how my immigrant friends and I, because our parents were functioning in such a different level, they came from such difficult places that the advice they would offer us would often not really relate to our American experience. My one friend, an Indian American friend, his father said to him, "Son, your muscle tone is so low that no woman will ever marry you. And to make up for that, you have to become an engineer." That was his life advice, right? And we all got advice like that, like just, day and night. It was all like, well, you're not good at this, so you have to. No one will ever love you for your looks, but if you become a coked-up corporate lawyer, everything's going to work out great. Try that. So because we couldn't quite count on them for these things that many native-born children count on, but not all, obviously, we turned to each other, and we were sort of these weird hybrids of friends, sometimes lovers, but also siblings, parents in some ways to each other in different ways. Like we all took up strange roles. Like I was the writer, so I wrote everyone's cover letters and resumes, when they were applying for those temp jobs back when we were in our early 20s. Another friend of mine noticed that I still dressed like I was, just off the plane from Leningrad, and which became kind of hip for a while, but not that particular while. And she took me to Screaming Mimi's, that that store. Yeah, some of you know it, and kind of dressed me in flammable materials from neck to to foot, and it was great. And I think that kind of bonding is really takes place in this book quite a lot, because there are characters who do different things for each other, when I look back, I think my friends really were my family, and in some ways still are. Yeah.
Right. Maybe to get a little more specific about this book. So for those of you who haven't yet read it, it's got a group of six friends in total.
5 friends visit, 3. There's a family of 3, and then 5 more show up.
Okay. So yes, we've got 8 people stranded here at the bungalow colony. That the main character, well, I shouldn't even call him the main character, but the landowner.
The landowner, Sasha the landowner.
Brings together, and so they all come with their different backstories and their different situations. Where am I going with this?
They come up from the city.
And so the landowner, Sasha, he has certain things in common with some of your other protagonists, maybe even you yourself. He's a Russian immigrant, a writer, but I don't want to give too much away for the audience. So we learn fairly early in the book that he has, as much as he loves his friends, he's very excited for them to join him in this bungalow colony he's set up in the hopes that his friends will spend time with him there. But we learn that he's done something in the past that...
Yeah. Look, you need tension in a book. Otherwise, if everyone just has a great 401k and, loves their spouse... People like that are awful. I try not to even meet them. But there's 2 focal points, I think. There's a guy who shows up called the actor, who's sort of the hand grenade that goes off, and he sleeps with everyone, kind of is, a bull in a china shop. And the other part of it is the backstory of these characters, and there's a betrayal between this group of friends. Because for me, if it was just about the niceness of their friendship, I don't care. Somebody has to do something to someone else. And I decided that the character that most resembled me will be the schmuckiest of these characters and do something. Now, do I have an interior schmuck that could do something so terrible? I don't think so. But something exactly like in this book happened to me from a friend of mine. So this is sort of how you work. You try to take a little from column A, a little bit from column B, and then you sort of format it.
I thought it was funny because in the Russian Debutante's Handbook, the main character gets involved in a Ponzi scheme. I found that much more forgivable than what Sasha does, which is not illegal or, it's interesting how sometimes more subtle.
But the Ponzi scheme was to try to get money out of rich trust fund kids in Prague. That's a mitzvah. That's not fraud. That's using your head, But here, no, I hear what you're saying. It was, it was, and I remember there was one reviewer who really liked the book who said I couldn't handle that Sasha went and did this terrible thing. Right. But, hopefully he repents for it a little bit and learns a little. And no, I'm kidding. Nobody learns anything in these books. But yeah, definitely. I think, I didn't, it's funny that you mentioned that betrayal because going into the book, I didn't think that this was going to happen. But you probably do this, and I think all writers kind of do this. You let your characters, you form them in your mind, then you put them on the stage, and then some things you micromanage with your puppet strings, but other stuff happens on its own, and sometimes they shock you with how far they can take things.
He shocked me.
Good.
So, and the actor, who's such a memorable character, what was channeling his voice like?
It was fun. So I've done a lot of work in TV, and so I have a lot of fun just hanging out with these very, very high-profile actors. Because our country doesn't have theoretically a royalty, a monarchy or anything like that. So this is, I think, as close as we get are these people. And I kind of feel a little bad for them sometimes because they have such a duty. It's like if you watch The Queen, the Crown or whatever, right? And Queen Elizabeth's like, hey, I'm doing this for the country. I don't exist. I'm just the Jewish queen, Hey, Britain, United Kingdom and Northern Ireland. Do we need the island, the Northern? Sorry, okay, but I really should not do this at my London reading. if they'll even let me in after this horrible breach of etiquette. But we don't have a monarchy, and sometimes I'd like have dinner with one of these people who are just the people, or I'd walk down the street with them, and all these people, all of a sudden they're not just interacting with me if they're talking to me, they're interacting with the 400 people who are having minor heart attacks upon seeing this exalted being walking down 18th Street, and they're taking photos, and I can't believe who I just saw, and the world is so warped. And I think, and many of the people I know, I used to teach James Franco at Columbia, for example, and James wanted to be, and he's a pretty decent writer, and he was doing poetry and studying all these things. He wanted to be an artist, but people just saw him as this actor, right? And I think there's that constant tug of war between what you want to be and the way the rest of the public perceives you. So the actor comes with all this very heavy baggage, he's carrying all this heavy baggage, but on the other hand, he's also an asshole. So you combine those two traits and you have this, and he has absolutely no regard for anyone. But then, and I'm not giving away too much because this happens pretty early in the book, one of the other characters is an app developer, and she's just made $1 billion with this app that's basically a love potion, and everyone falls in love when they do this. So the actor falls in love with one of these mere mortals. So then it becomes kind of a Greek tragedy or comedy, or both, where this woman that he would never have fallen in love with, now he's in love with, and then he manages to sleep with everyone else too. So he's a busy guy. Even in the pandemic, instead of baking bread, he's baking bread.
Do you think it's possible to explain the app? So
the app is called True Emotion. There's a lot of umlauts. I do those umlauts all the time. Remember my apparat or whatever from Super something? And the idea is you take a photo of, say it's the two of us, we take a photo together, and there's an algorithm that, and then we look into our own eyes, not each other's eyes, and we see something that makes us fall in love with that person. It works on 50% of the people who look at it. And there's all these class action lawsuits from people who've lost their spouses to this app. It's horrendous, but it's made Karen, one of the characters, a lot of money. And so, it's another sort of plot device in a kind of Midsummer Night Dream kind of way that keep things going and keep people sleeping with each other. Because again, a pandemic novel is something, I remember I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to try to sell a pandemic novel to my editor. And I remember calling him and I was like, it's Chekhov meets The Big Chill, okay? And he was like, well, take it.
Right, but with that Midsummer Night's Dream.
With a twist of Midsummer Night Dream. He's like, how many bags of money do you want? Exactly how it happens. Just how Random House rolls. Too.
Having so many characters and so many different voices, did you have a favorite in terms of voices to channel?
Favorite? I had some fun with Masha, who is Sasha's. So the joke is it's Sasha, Masha, and Natasha. Natasha's their kid. I had fun with Masha because Masha, Sasha Senderovsky is this Russian writer, and Masha is his wife, who is a Russian psychiatrist. So there we differ in experiences. My wife is neither Russian nor a psychiatrist, although it would have helped me and both of us maybe if she were. But she's a psychiatrist who deals with elderly Soviet, post-Soviet patients who are all on Facebook reading all these lies about everything, Bill Gates is going to whatever, microchip them and all this other crap. So I had fun because on my Facebook account, I have a bunch of Russians who are like that. So I just went down their threads and was like, oh my God, this dialogue writes itself. And then I kind of thought, like, what would it be like if I was a therapist? Because I have many therapists, all somewhere here probably. And so, how do you talk to someone who chooses an unreality? And many of my relatives, my Russian relatives, are also on that fringe, the whole stop the steal type of thing. So that was fun. That was fun to channel that character. And she also, not to give away too much, but she also has an affair. And that, to me, writing that affair, which is the unlikeliest of affairs, was also kind of thrilling. Like I remember there's a lot of sex in this. There's one sex scene in a shower that I was just like, I can't believe I'm going here, and which is always a great feeling.
Right.
And then I went there, and I never came back. I'm still there.
Yeah, maybe there's an element of Lady Chatterley's lover in there.
Yeah, oh yeah. Ooh, good. Very good, yeah. Huh.
Whose voice was hardest to channel?
Whose voice was hardest to channel? Maybe a little bit D. So there's a woman called D. Cameron. Ha ha ha. D. The Cameron. She was tough. Why? Oh, because she wasn't an immigrant. I had to sort of cobble her from just some experiences. So she's from the South, and she's a very incendiary essay writer. And she is of the left, but she sometimes flirts with the far right when her book sales are low, to try to get some attention. So it was hard for me to, there was no exact one-to-one there. I mean, I know Southern women, but they're always nice ones like Mary Carr, you know. My first girlfriend was in Oberlin, my first girlfriend was from North Carolina. So she was Southern, I guess, but so Oberlinated that it was hard to tell. I mean, I was twanging more than her, you know. So that was a character that I really had to come up from scratch. And I think what was really helping was that I was on Twitter, like everyone else, and during the pandemic I was on Twitter and just watching people. It was funny. It wasn't like that people were worried about being canceled. It was that they were worried about being ignored.
Right.
And so people kept coming up with these very difficult strategies of getting noticed one way or another and getting semi-canceled, but also getting their profile raised. And so that character, you know, that's the one character in the book that was inspired, and you know, a lot by social media.
Right. And so the social media element and the character. I mean, this is set during the pandemic, which we all remember all too well, and the event it accounts for current events. So when you started the book, George Floyd hadn't died.
Hadn't been killed, no.
And you didn't know
No.
this was going to.
No.
I mean, this is so interesting because the reaction to George Floyd's death was playing a role in the book, and it's so interesting to think that happened organically.
I mean, who was it who said, was it Primo Levi who said after the Holocaust, you know, no writing about this for X amount of years? And I usually stick by that dictum. Like, I hadn't produced I'm not comparing anything to the Holocaust, but I'm saying I didn't produce like a 9/11 novel, although there have been some good ones written. But this felt very familiar. This pandemic felt or our response to the pandemic felt very Soviet to me, right? Because you turn on the TV and the General Secretary of the Republican Party, Donald Trumpovich, would be lying the same way Brezhnev was lying. You know, there wasn't any difference. It would just say, well, yes, you know, comrades, the bleach is going to save everyone. Factory number 12 in Bleachsk, the town of Bleachsk in Bleachivka province, Bleachivka Oblast is going to produce bleach for everyone to drink, and it's going to be wonderful, you know. And the 5-year bleach plan is going to. So this felt to me that was even scarier than the actual pandemic in some ways. Obviously, people were dying, but the fact that I was living in a country that was underperforming, you know, at this point, any other country. Right. I remember like looking up, you know, Senegal had a great plan to combat the pandemic. You know, I was like, damn, why can't General Secretary Trumpovsky look at that, you know? But the idea was, I think that in the book, the way that became formulated was that all these characters had their parents bring them to this country when they were young because India or Korea or China or the Soviet Union, all these countries had gone through such terrible upheavals, and they had seen all these upheavals, and they wanted a safe space, a safe place for their children. And then they bring them here, and then as these children reach middle age, what happens? You know, the safe space disappears.
Right. I mean, I feel like that was such a theme in Super Sad Tree Love Story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's 10 years earlier, sort of anticipating the end of at least the country we thought or hoped we lived in.
Yeah, and that was written under the Obama years, but it was social media that was the big driver there, you know. Oh, you have some questions.
I'm going to start with the audience questions, but I have to say the first one I read incorrectly. I thought it said, "What are you wearing?" It says, "What watch are you wearing?"
What watch are you wearing? Oh, is that the real question?
It says, "What watch are you wearing?"
Oh my God. Oh.
I'm a,
Uptown knows me well. This is a great watch. This is a Lange und Sonne. It's a Saxonia thin in white gold. It's a 37 millimeters, perfect for a small wrist like my own. It has a beautiful 3/4 plate made out of German silver. Isn't this beautiful?
wow.
You almost get the effect, I wish you guys could see it. It's so beautiful.
Nice.
It's almost the effect of a pocket watch, but in a tiny, and it's also 5.9 millimeters thin. The thinness of this watch, I mean, I almost feel like wearing a tuxedo and having a martini when I see this. Just beautiful. Thank you. Lovely question. Thank you.
How did you feel about
Yeah. People like Lange und Sonne in this part of town.
How did you feel about imbuing your passion for watches on Barry Cohen in like Success? Did you feel mixed about sharing that with that character, or did
it was
a
wonderful.
natural fit?
It was a natural fit. So for Lake Success, which was about a hedge funder, I spent 4 years hanging out with hedge funders and lived to tell the tale. Man, did I have a lot of very expensive whiskey. But yeah, they were also very curious about watches. And now when I do readings around the country, often people bring me their watches to sign in signing lines. I signed the straps. But I've also signed, I signed a baby in Seattle, which is illegal completely, but there I was, you know. I signed a dachshund. I mean, it just gets worse and worse. People, take it easy, you know.
So would you like to see this book adapted for the screen?
Yeah, I'm going to talk next week to some people who may have some ideas. Absolutely, people are already sending me all these ideas. I think somebody who's in the audience sent me an idea of who everyone should be. Hold on, I just took a photo of it. It was really funny. Oh, now I can't find this photo because I can't do anything correctly on my phone. Oh, recents? No? Okay, sorry. But he has some really great ideas, which I've already completely forgotten. But they were really good. So yeah, think about who should play. Karen Cho, he wanted, Sandra Oh, right? Oh, she's one of my favorite actors. Sandra Oh for Karen. Who did he want for, he want Sacha Baron Cohen for Sasha Cinderowski? That would make sense, right? One Sasha to another. He had a good Masha too. Anyway, I'll try to find it. It's good. Thank you. Keep doing that, people. Send me stuff.
Someone points out that this is the first book where your protagonist partner is a Russian Jew. And
in my books.
Yeah.
Or in books in general?
Sorry, did I misstate it? No. The questioner was clear. The first of Gary's books.
Oh, okay.
Where the protagonist partner.
There have been Russian Jewish women in fiction. Ask Henry Roth.
But can you tell us a little bit about that decision?
Yeah, I wanted to do, because I've never been married. I've only been married once, but my wife isn't Russian or Jewish. But I thought it would be interesting if when I was growing up, I wanted to get as far away from fellow Russians as possible after a certain age. When I first came here, I loved, because my only friends were Russians because I didn't speak any English, and so we had this little bungalow colony upstate. But then I thought, the hell with this, I'm going to be as American as possible. For a while, I pretended I wasn't even born in Russia. I pretended I was born in East Berlin, right? Isn't that horrifying, right? Best place for any Jew to be born. But I wanted to, as these years I've made Russian friends who are not, who are like normal progressive people. Mm-hmm. And I want, of my generation, right? In some ways, it's interesting. I talk to my friends who are Cuban American, another post-communist kind of thing, and they also talk about the changes in generations as they go along. So I wanted Masha to be like just a decent person, mm-hmm. Which I haven't. And in the book, she also is, because she's a medical doctor as well as a psychiatrist. She, as COVID breaks out, she's the one that's sort of like, don't touch that, and don't, because we didn't know what the hell was going on. I was deathly worried about that aerosol plume from the toilet. Remember that? I was like, I'd go out when the restaurant's open, I'd go out for dinner for like 3 hours and hold it in. I'd be like, because I know that death plume was going to kill me.
And that comes up in the book?
It comes up in the book too, yeah. It's like reliving all these wonderful times we had. I swear it's funny. It's just...
It is. Someone also asks if you can tell us a little bit more about the black pickup truck.
Oh, yeah. So the characters in this book are haunted by a black pickup truck, which is the ultimate symbol of sort of rural MAGA-ness. And they don't know who it is. Maybe there's some. We have these stickers on the back of black pickup trucks where we live. That have strange symbols that could be of a very far right disposition, or just giant signs that say Trump train, which leave very little to the imagination. And so these characters are very worried, and especially several characters are worried because they are Asian Americans, and my wife is Asian American, and I remember when the whole Wuhan China virus, people would put up slogans, on their cafes saying, we don't, be careful of the China virus and stuff like that. And there's an incident in this book, I won't get into it, but where some of that, stuff is actually born to life. So yeah, I mean, there, my friends who are people of color who live up there actually did have an interesting, a frightened reaction. But then again, the actual violence that happened was more in places like New York and San Francisco, the anti-Asian violence than upstate.
Right,
so, it's very difficult to sort of parse out one place from the other.
Right. But at least we had a president who did everything he could to...
He tried so hard to bring us together. I mean, he would just put down that glass of bleach and say, comrades.
Someone else asks, what's so objectionable about tooling around?
Oh, I don't know. It's one of those phrases that I know Americans can say, native-born Americans can say this, but for me, tooling around, and my real name is Igor, not Gary. Gary's ridiculous. For the Igors and Sashas of the world, tooling around, not so good. I don't know. But, I actually do feel, and I feel super Americanized since I've moved up there because I'm able to go to the Kingston Mall, which I think is important for your literary endeavors these days. I go to the Kingston Mall, one of these shops, Schlunks or something, and I buy these gigantic things of Charmin, the family size, USA, and I walk and I go over to my automobile and I try to cram it in there, and I'm like, yeah, baby, you will never deport me from here. Yeah, because I'm wasting gas and I'm wasting Charmin. But tooling around, no.
Yeah.
Haram, forbidden.
Gosh, it's so funny. I'm so torn between going on to the next question and expanding upon this, because I feel like the interviewer should not do a lot of talking, especially when you're interviewing someone like Gary, who's so funny. And but it's interesting. So you forced me to think so much about my own status, because my mother is an immigrant.
Mm-hmm, that's right.
But my father isn't, and I was born here. Yeah. So I feel like it's like it's a funny in between, because there's so much I relate to, and then there's other ways where I feel like I wouldn't want to presume to relate to.
Yeah, this is a topic that I can never get enough of, and as I'm starting to maybe think of the next book I'm writing, I want to write about that next generation of sort of people who have one kind of parent and then another kind of parent, whether it's racial or immigrant status or something like that, and working with that as a way of sort of this kind of strange hybridity, and because one parent gives you one view of the world and another gives you another, right? Which is what you're talking about with your own parents, right?
Right, and yeah, and it's just a funny mix, because I feel like I relate on both sides. I certainly will relate to this strangeness that the immigrant child feels, but I also feel like I was the obnoxious American-born kid at the Jewish school growing up.
Who would have, yeah.
Yeah. I felt shame in reading.
Oh,
and I think
it's okay. These things happen. These circumcisions happen. A little snip, 49 years of pain.
And to be clear, I was at a different Jewish school. I was down in Baltimore. I was not actually...
Oh, and you were in Baltimore, so all is forgiven. I mean, I've seen The Wire. It wasn't easy. Yeah. Schechter, The Wire.
Yeah, that's exactly what Beth the Phila Day School was like.
Yeah. Omarovitz is coming. It took a while, but you got it. Yeah.
Well, to return to the regularly scheduled questions.
Okay.
So someone asks about your writing workshops, and they don't mention the book. Maybe they haven't read it yet, but in the book, Sasha discusses how he ran his writing workshop, and there was a lot of drinking involved.
Yeah, that is how I run my workshop. Is that a question, how I run it?
It wants to know how you organize your curriculum and
drinking. So
yeah.
I teach at the Columbian School of the Arts, College of the Arts? No, School of the Arts. The
School of the Arts.
Come si dice?
I think. I don't know.
The school where we make you a writer, huh?
The MFA program?
The MFA program. Yes. You are the master of the entire fine arts. It's really great. And so the wonderful part of that is that they're graduate students, so drinking is allowed, right? Because they're 23 going on 90. So, so I do have a kind of, it's a Socratic method, but with hints of Hemingway and Gertrude Stein in the proliferation of drinks. Each week people are assigned a different bottle to bring to the class. I know some people have religious differences, but I get rid of those pretty quickly. And it helps because I think, it loosens up the class. We are able to talk more about each other's work in a drunken, constructive manner. People like to go to my classes. Classes go on for a long time. It's good. I love my roles as an educator. It's just, it's good. And my teachers did that to me too. I was... Yeah. Also, there was a lot of drinking. I went to Hunta. I didn't go to Columbia. I went to Hunta. Fun to say that, huh? Hunta. $800 it cost, and you got a free steak back then.
To address the audience member's question, is there anything else you might want to say about how you run your class? I mean, I think this is the most important element, but just to fully address it in terms of, it's a big question, but
the workshop is an organic thing. You can't. I have no technique, no pedagogical technique. I do have the reader, the person whose work we're critiquing. She reads the first page of the work. Mm-hmm. And then, because it's very important, I think a lot of students, a lot of writers don't really read their own stuff. And then they end up writing in this writerly voice, that isn't anything about who they are, right? It doesn't channel their own personality or the personalities of the people they're trying to write about. So there's kind of a bullshit meter that goes off when you read. And I could see that, some people whose work is really good, they'll read that page and they'll get into it and really enjoy it. And people who don't get into it, they'll see it as a bunch of sentences that kind of maybe don't belong together. So that's one way of doing it. And I always tell people, if you're going to write dialogue, read plays or watch The Sopranos or something like that. See how people actually talk to each other as opposed to how writers think people talk to each other. That's very important. So maybe that helps the question.
Another one. I feel very mixed about asking this because I too am curious, but I also feel like as a novelist, it's kind of a terrible thing to do to you, but I'm going to ask anyway. But it's because what it is a question about how you feel about one of your reviews. But I feel like it's very good because it's a very positive review. But it's about the review by Dana Spiata, and that was on the cover of the book review several weeks ago, which is a wonderful review, I thought.
That's the question. How do I feel about that review?
That is the question.
Thank you. I felt great.
Do you tend to remember the like only the bad reviews like
That's
every
funny.
other writer?
Yeah. So when the Russian debutante's hand job, whatever the hell that book was, when that was published, and I was 29 and still very much my parents' son. So I always joke it's the SAP school, the Soviet Ashkenazi pessimist, where it's not that the glass is half empty or half full. There is no glass. And I got 30 reviews, including a completely over-the-top, beautiful review from Michiko Kakutani, and amazing reviews, Washington Post, Boston Globe, I mean, you name it. There was one bad review out of those 30, the San Francisco Chronicle, and I remembered that one, almost line by line, right? Because that was the one, and I thought, okay, this woman, I'd never heard from her since, but that reviewer probably got it right, and Michiko and everyone else got it wrong. But now my mentality has changed after 29 years of therapy. It's been like, now I only remember the Dana Spiata type reviews. Yeah, and if the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette doesn't like it, screw them. They live in Pittsburgh. Good luck. Progress, people. Yeah. You've referred a little bit to your next book. Is there a book in progress? Not really in progress, no. But I have a couple of ideas. I mean, one idea I had was to write a book about recovering from pain, and this particular pain. But the particularity of that pain may make this book inaccessible to large swaths of, let's call them men. So funny, I mean, I ran into some of my best friends, and the women have all read it, the New Yorker piece, and are, how are you, et cetera, and the men are like, I can't.
Yeah.
I can't. So we obviously only have 50% of the audience, but that's something that I thought about. But the other is there's a novel also brewing about this topic we're talking about.
It's another reason I'd advocate for reading all of his books together now, because it's really interesting to read the New Yorker story in conjunction with Little Failure, where the memoir, where we get the circumcision, and then another version of it in Absurdistan. It's like you get multiple angles on the same. It's very interesting.
Yeah, when I was writing the New Yorker piece, I counted there were 20 instances of discussions of circumcisions in Absurdistan, and that book did okay, So maybe we're ready for it. Maybe as a country. Yeah.
So your usual 4-year process between books that was not the case here in this 6-month. Book. Do you usually spend all 4 years writing the book, or do you take a year off between?
I usually have an idea, but as I said, so this is the second book that's derailed, the NYU Conquers Manhattan book, and then I had a sexy thriller set in 14 cities around the world that was just a disaster. I remember giving it to my editor at the time, and it was a 240-page manuscript, and I remember getting 240 pages of notes back on it. I was like, all right, maybe this isn't going to work. But once I get something that works, and I know that I can do this, so I'd meet all these hedge fund miscreants, and then I'd be like, okay, I get this now. I know how to make them not sympathetic, but enough that I can communicate what their world is like. Then, it's a question of research to writing, the ratio between the two, how much research is needed. This was the first book. One of the reasons I got this done in 6 months is there's absolutely no research involved here. It was literally written from the news, so now there's this happening in Minneapolis, now it's going into the book, and then just using my own loneliness and trying to create imaginary friends for myself on my long walks, then became characters in this book. So, yeah.
Are you still in touch with friends from your Stuyvesant days?
It's funny because now, when the pandemic hit, this was another reason that writing these characters was easy, all these groups began to pop up, even of people who hated each other in school. Like everyone wanted to talk to each other, and all these Zooms were happening, and it was really wild, people I hadn't heard, or people I couldn't remember. I had to look at my yearbooks, thank you, Jesus Christ. Zuckerbrot has destroyed everything. I don't even know what a yearbook is. I started to remember who they were by looking at the pictures. I mean, it was surreal. It was just, it became a giant project of people to recreate their lives, I think, which is why this book is about people getting to, the big chill meets Chekhov, right, where they all get together after all this time and reconnect. Yeah.
I think we are, I had to put on a watch specially for this occasion because unlike Gary, I just rely on that apparat. I'm terrible. But I think we are at...
Well, according to my Lange und Sonne, it is 9:37. 8:37? 8:37, I never learned how to tell time. I collect watches, but that's the next part. Is I go to Time Telling University, also called Hampshire College, and they teach you that there.
I'm also not wearing my glasses, so I don't see if Bernard is waving his hand saying, you gotta wrap up.
I don't see anything
either.
No, pretty blind too. Is there another question, or have we answered everything?
We've answered everything, but I could ask you another question if you want.
Sure.
You tell me. Okay, I'm going to phrase this carefully so I don't give too much away for those of you who haven't read the book. In the book, one character falls in love with another character after reading his novel. Why did it take her reading the novel? She's known him for 25, 30 years.
Well, I think because, especially as immigrants, we often have a kind of facade that, we are, that was one of the things I was talking about the actor being an actor, but and at one point the actor gets angry and he's like, "You freaking immigrants, you're the actors here. You know, you're never true to yourself. You're always trying to play to an Americanized audience. I actually studied, you know, at Yale for this, or New Haven as he calls it." And that was really interesting. I was being interviewed by a friend of mine, an immigrant writer, Dinao Mengistu, who also lives in our neck of the woods, and he was talking about the way, you know, migrants play a role. And he actually made the connection, and he's saying that even the virus itself becomes a kind of migrant into this community, right? Which is an interesting way to look at it. But yeah, I mean, I wanted this person's innermost feelings to have gone into this work that never saw the light of day. But even among his best friends, he wasn't able to be himself, which again goes back to the idea that these are often children who see their friends almost as siblings or sometimes even parents, where they can't share the way you can't share some of your innermost thoughts with a parent for the most part. So yeah, I wanted that in there. But it's also, I've never written about writers before, and that was one thing at the Columbian School for the Masters of the Finest Arts. I always say, God, please don't write about MFA programs. I mean, it's just so boring. But, you know, rules, once you master the rules, you can hopefully break them a little, because there's good stuff. I mean, the MFA is a very funny thing to write about. So in this case, I decided to break my rule and actually write about writers and failed writers, not so failed writers.
Right.
And it was fun, you know. But don't do that if you're just starting out. Write about your parents. That's what literature's for. You gotta take them down a couple of notches, you know. That's why God invented literature.
Which of your books is your parents' favorite?
Which of my books is my favorite? I think they will enjoy this once it's ever translated into Russian, because they're not in this, you know.
Yeah.
They're really not in this. I've internalized them to such an extent, I am now them. I am the Alpha and the Omicron, or whatever. Oh, too soon? Too soon? See, that's how I work, right? Oh, God. All right.
All right.
Well, thanks. I mean, thank you for coming. Thank you, Adele.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.